Mr. Kiefer holds a doctorate of law and finished a postgraduate university program in general management with a focus on public management. He's worked as head of the private office of Land Salzburg's president and was director of the European Affairs Service of Land Salzburg. He served as Secretary General of the Conference of Presidents of Regions with Legislative Powers, as Common Representative of the Austrian Länder for the Intergovernmental Conferences of the EU, and for the subsidiarity control mechanism of the Austrian Länder. He has published widely and is a member of the scientific committee of the Institute for Studies on Federalism and Regionalism of the Iraq-Bolzano-Bozan. Mr. Kiefer was selected Secretary General of the Congress in 2010 and re-elected in March 2015, and is currently being appointed Acting General Secretary. So without further ado, please, Mr. Kiefer.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon. Greetings from the capital of Europe, as the city of Strasbourg in France calls itself, being the seat of the European Parliament, but also being the seat of the Council of Europe, a pan-European international organization established in 1949 by 12 states in order to defend democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And this is an issue that is relevant at all times. All of those three elements, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law, need permanent work in order to be granted, in order to be defended, in order to be developed. And this pandemic also showed that it is not only about human lives, about health, it's about the social tissue, about the functioning of institutions, the responsibility and the roles in these processes. It was very important to define the roles of the experts, the virologists, and the role of politicians to take the decisions, to take responsibility, and to be accountable to the citizens. And it is very much about multi-level governance, about who does what the best, and to find the right balance between efficiency and effectivity. It might be efficient to have a small group of people deciding what's going to happen, but will it be effective? Will people follow? And one of the elements, and that was also represented in some of the statements today, is participation, inclusion, consultation, taking on board in order to assure a very good quality of the decisions, and especially in these difficult situations, also to share the burden of the responsibility. The Congress of Local and Regional Authorities is the organization representing about 150,000 municipalities, cities, and regions from 47 countries on the European continent, the Pan-European Conference of Mayors and Governors, if you want. Our Congress was established in 1994, so 26 years ago, in a period when Europe was completely about to change. 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and many other democratic revolutions in the countries of the former Soviet Union and its influence led member states to change their democratic institutions. They wanted to rebuild local self-government, which had a certain connotation. Regional was always linked to former communist structures. And at that time, the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities was established as the third political assembly of the Council of Europe, besides the Committee of Ministers and the Parliamentary Assembly, who are the most important institutions, and the Congress with its 5 different roles. I will come to that. I will not so much speak about what the Congress has found in responses given by our members. We had very good and very thorough discussions of our 3 committees last week, where the monitoring committee discussed the impact of the crisis on the functioning of democratic institutions. Can elections be held? How legitimate is it to postpone elections, and under which conditions, and for how long? So all these issues are being discussed. The Current Affairs Committee discussed the impact of the crisis on vulnerable groups, especially in cities. It seems that the social tissue in the countryside is more developed than in cities, also as a matter of capacity. And finally, the current affairs, the governance committee, discussed the questions on how did the interaction between the different levels work. And there we found that both horizontally and vertically changes took place. Horizontally, sometimes central authorities tried to get back competencies from the regions and the municipalities, and in many cases during the crisis then returned those competencies and gave even more responsibility to the local authorities, as they saw that a one-size-fits-all approach would not lead to the results that they wanted to. Horizontally, impact that we saw was that there was a shift in responsibility and action from assemblies, councils, parliaments to the executives, to mayors, to governments. So there are trends that we have identified, and it's, I think, still too early to say how this will remain in the future or not. It's a period that we are still in where we have to watch, not to take preliminary conclusions at this stage. We are in the middle of a process where also the institutions will have to adapt. What we have seen and what was witnessed from our members, mayors, councillors, presidents of regional parliaments, regional ministers from our 47 countries, was that wherever local and regional authorities were included in emergency task forces at national level from the very beginning, the quality of the decisions was better. The quality was more accepted at the local and regional level and was communicated in a uniform way. Also, and this is especially in the first phase, opposition parties were taken on board, and they also carried this first lockdown, which was a very severe decision. Things are changing now. Oppositions are now, with the knowledge of today, criticizing what governments are doing or have done. I think this is a phenomenon that you find all over, but that does not mean that this dialogue in this extraordinary situation should not continue. So a lot of things happened at the national level between the different national, local and regional authorities, but very much also happens at European level. The Council of Europe is not the European Union. The European Union, with its competencies also in the areas of infrastructure and research, for example, but not health. And the Council of Europe, with its values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. Very early, the Council of Europe issued a toolkit to defend democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in the times of crisis as a guideline for member states. And our Congress of Local and Regional Authorities has gathered experiences which we will put together and present to the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe, whose foreign ministers, if possible, will meet early November for a ministerial meeting in Athens under the Greek chairmanship at this stage. 2 more minutes. What are the tasks of the Congress of Local and Regional Authority? Well, it's a forum of exchange of peers, of mayors and presidents of regions, regional parliaments from 47 member states to discuss their needs domestically and vis-à-vis international organization. It is an advisory and consultative organ for the Committee of Ministers and the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, making proposals on the change of Council of Europe conventions. There are more than 200. On introducing new conventions in order to meet the needs of the local and regional authorities. And very specifically, the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities is a monitoring body. It's the watchdog for local and regional democracy. 35 years ago, the Council of Europe opened the European Charter of Local Self-Government for ratification. And now, since 2013, all 47 member states have ratified this European Charter of Local Self-Government, and the Congress of Local and Regional Authorities is the monitoring body. We also observe local and regional elections and give feedback to the member states what should be improved. So in order to establish an international body of local and regional authorities in an international organization, you have to analyze what's the benefit for the member states and for the organization, for the Council of Europe, what's the benefit for the values this organization stands for, and what is the benefit for the local and regional authorities, and especially their domestic umbrella organizations, their national associations of cities, national association of regions, and so on. And there we have a lot to contribute. We offer a forum to learn from each other, and we know politicians want to learn, but they don't want to be taught. So this learning is an involvement that takes into account the philosophy of politicians. It's the forum for innovation, to exchange good practices and not so good practices. And we don't come with a one-size-fits-all approach. We are a hub for good practice. Sometimes we have to be also realistic. Best practice sometimes or very often doesn't work. Good practice is good. Good is good enough and solves many, many problems. And that is also in order not to discourage other countries that may not be as advanced as those ones who have a long tradition. So for the COVID crisis, better quality through consultation and early involvement, and the international dimension, the role of a consultative and possibly monitoring organization within this international organization composed of local and regional politicians sent by their respective national association can contribute to improving the quality of what is to be delivered by this international organization.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kiefer. I will now go ahead and open the floor for discussion. And we have some questions from the audience. And another member of the audience is actually asking, due to the financial debts generated by the pandemic, not evenly distributed among federal and subnational governments, can we foresee institutional changes to be adopted to address this imbalance? Mr. Kiefer.
Well, thank you very much. Talking about our younger brother, the European Union, there is something in Europe that you can expect. We have the so-called Stability Pact, the Pact for Growth, which limits indebtedness to 3% of the GDP. And I'm sure, and this is valid for all member states, some of them are more respectful than others already now, but that will be a completely new situation now. So there are mechanisms within most of the member states of the European Union on how to share the burden, or on the other hand, on how to share the 3% among the federation, national government, regions, and local authorities. In Austria, for example, the country I come from, the local authorities committed to underspend, meaning they contribute with a negative part of the 3%. So the federal government can spend more on their behalf. The Länder committed to equal budgets, and so the federal government more or less can have the 3%. So there are domestic structures on how to negotiate about the share of the allowed indebtedness. And that will be a process that will go on all over Europe, in all member states, at the multi-level state, wherever it's appropriate, as soon as the European Union has decided on how to handle this need of member states to borrow money, and significant amounts of money.
Thank you, Mr. Kiefer. Another member of the audience is actually asking, how can communication between central and subnational governments be streamlined to ensure more fluid exchanges and communications?
Well, behind me, you see Article 4.6 of the European Charter of Local Self-Government, which is all about consultation. The Congress of Local and Regional Authorities has established guidelines and a handbook and a consultation strategy. So it must be regular, substantial, timely. There are many aspects, transparent, also things that are being taken into account should be published, as well as those who are not, and the reasons. It should be institutionalized and not based on persons. So yes, there are ideas on the table, good practice, and I invite you to consult our Congress website on the consultation strategy.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kiefer. We'll move to the next one. Okay, somebody here is also asking, I am interested in hearing perspectives on the constitutionality of restricting travel across subnational borders, particularly when it is the initiative of subnational governments themselves. Yeah, sure, Mr. Kiefer.
Thank you. Well, just to contribute from, again, my home country, Austria, where parts of the European phenomenon was sparked up again after the Italian colleagues suffered most at the beginning. One region, Land Tirol, locked down the whole region, and you were only allowed to leave your municipality for compelling reasons, going to work or going to a pharmacy if there is no pharmacy in your own. The regional government of Land Salzburg, for example, closed down 5 municipalities where the figures were extremely high. So there was the will to take responsibility at the local, or in this case, regional level, and it contributed to the acceptance. Maybe also because the hospitals in Austria are run by the regions, and so they have the direct responsibility for both sides, the health system and the health infrastructure. So yes, there are examples where a complete ban and police was really controlling whether people were allowed to leave their municipality, and that's at a very, very small scale.
Thank you, Mr. Kiefer. Anybody else for that question? Sure, Mr. Chattopadhyay.
Yeah, I mean, the whole issue of constitutionality of intranational, cross-provincial, cross-state movements, yeah, has been called into question. There have been challenges in many parts of the world. But I think, if I'm not mistaken, having done having a survey of various countries where they've imposed restrictions of movement across state or provincial boundaries, most of these states, or most of these subnational jurisdictions, have actually relied on declaring health emergencies and excluding it that way. But there still remains a sore issue in many countries. So yeah, it's still something that's being worked out in courts and amongst constitutional lawyers.
Thank you for that.